I've asked myself many times if a mother can hate her own daughter so much that she'd sell her like an animal for slaughter. And yes, my dear, it can happen. It happened to me. My name is Sebastiana, but everyone here in Three Rivers calls me Miss Tiana, or the old lady at the end of the street. I'm carrying 79 years on my back, each one heavier than lead. Every wrinkle on my face has a story to tell, and believe me, there are plenty. Some of joy, others of so much pain that even time couldn't properly erase. I was born in a place so small it didn't even appear on maps. A little township almost 2 hours by wagon from the nearest city. Back then, life was hard. It wasn't like today with electric lights and running water. We had kerosene lamps, well water, and plenty of mud on our feet. My father disappeared before I was even born. My mother, Jandira, always said he was a good man who went to work in Chicago and would come back someday. Lies. I only discovered much later that he had run off with a woman from the neighboring town, leaving my mother heavily pregnant and without a penny to her name. My mother never got over that abandonment, and the worst part is that she seemed to blame me for it. Every time she looked at me, it was like she was seeing my father's ghost. "The face of that no good," she would mutter when she thought I couldn't hear. I grew up knowing I wasn't welcome in this world, the child nobody wanted. For a while, it was just the two of us in a small dirt floor room at the back of my grandmother's house. My poor grandmother didn't have much to give either, but at least she didn't look at me with that contempt. She was the one who taught me my first letters because there was only school in the city. Oh, my dear, if you're enjoying this sad story, do give this old lady a hand by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I'm also curious. Tell me in the comments where in America you're watching from. Sometimes I wonder if there's anyone from Three Rivers here who might know me by sight without knowing this whole story. When I was about 6, my mother found a man, Joe Small. He wasn't small at all. The nickname came because he had 6 toes on his right foot, and the extra toe was tiny. Superstitious country folk and their ways. He worked in a quarry and drank away every cent he earned. That's when things got even worse. My mother got pregnant right away. In less than 5 years, 3 more children came into the house. Little Joe, Mary, and the youngest Joey, whom everyone called Pinky after his father. The already small house became much too cramped. I, who was already unwanted, became almost a nuisance. Food was scarce, and when it came to my turn, often all that was left was watery bean broth and a piece of potato. "Eat less, girl. Your brothers and sisters need it more than you," my mother would always say. And I believed her. They were my half-siblings by blood, but I loved those children. It wasn't their fault they had a mother who chose who deserved love. Joe Small lost job after job, drank everything, beat my mother, and broke what little we had in the house. My grandmother died when I was 9, from a bad fever she caught in the winter. It was the worst day of my life because she was the only one who treated me like a person. All that was left from my grandmother's house was an old dresser that nobody wanted. I remember it like it was yesterday. Dark wood with a cracked mirror. I kept it under the bed where I slept with my siblings. It was my only treasure. Around this time, they started lending me out to work in other people's houses. First, it was just sweeping yards, then washing clothes, cooking, cleaning entire houses. The money all went to my mother, of course. She said it was to buy food for my siblings, but a good part went to her cigarettes and Joe Small's moonshine. There was a woman, Mrs. Azira, who even wanted to adopt me legally. She had no children, and her husband was the manager of the bank in town. People with money, a real house with proper flooring and everything. She treated me well, let me eat at the table with them, even gave me a new dress for Christmas. But my mother wouldn't allow it. "This one's my free help," she told Mrs. Azira to my face, without any shame. When I turned 11, I was already the size of a young woman. I grew up before my time, as happens with those who experience hardship. My body matured, but my head was still that of a child. That's when I noticed the different looks men began to give me when I went to the store or washed clothes in the river. A kind of look that gave me chills, that made me want to hide. My mother noticed too, and it awakened something in her that I'll never fully understand. A mixture of jealousy, envy, and that old hatred. She started locking me in the house when I wasn't working, saying I was offering myself to men, that I would end up like some tramp. As if that wasn't enough, Joe Small lost his job at the quarry for good. He broke his leg in a fall and never got steady work again. He spent all day at home drinking what little money he could make doing odd jobs here and there. Hunger tightened in a way I can't even explain. My little siblings cried from hunger at night. The smallest one, Pinky, started getting a swollen belly, a sign we knew well: worms and malnutrition. The boy who had always been skinny and smart became lethargic, without even the strength to play. One night, I heard my mother and Joe Small talking quietly in their room. The wall was thin. I could hear everything. "We need to do something, Jandira, or we'll all starve to death," he said. "What do you want me to do?" she answered. "I'm already working from sunup to sundown." There was a long silence, the kind that weighs in the air. Then his voice, even lower. "There's Juvenile. He's always wanted the girl." My blood froze in my veins. Juvenile was the owner of the brothel in town, a fat, sweaty man with a thin mustache that looked like a pencil line on his red face. He was over 50 and owned almost everything in that town. The brothel, 2 bars, a roadside motel, land parcels. Wherever there was dirty money, Juvenile had his finger in it. "Are you crazy?" my mother responded, but without the indignation a mother should have. It was more like she was considering the idea. "She's just a child. She's almost a young woman already," Joe Small insisted. "And Juvenile pays well, enough to buy medicine for Pinky, food for the others, and then some." I was paralyzed, barely able to breathe. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if the world had stopped spinning at that moment. "What if someone finds out?" my mother asked after a while. "Nobody will find out. Juvenile is smart. He'll take her to another town, say he's giving her a job as a maid or something. We'll say she ran away, that she was rebellious. Who's going to care about another poor girl who disappeared?" At that moment, I understood that my own mother was selling me like someone sells a chicken from the yard, a pig for slaughter. I wasn't a daughter. I was merchandise, something she could trade for money when need pressed hard enough. I spent the whole night awake, thinking about what to do. Run away? Where to? There was no one who would take me in. Mrs. Azira had moved to the state capital months ago. I had no relatives, no friends who could help me. And if I ran away, who would take care of my little siblings? By the time the sun rose, I already knew I had no choice. It was going to happen. My mother had decided, and against her, I had no strength. The only thing I could do was endure, survive, and one day, God willing, come back for my siblings. What I didn't imagine was that day would be sooner than I thought, and that my revenge would be as complete as the betrayal of my own mother. The morning after that conversation that should never have existed, I woke up to my mother shaking me by the arm. "Get up, girl. Today, you're going to town with Joe," she said, barely looking me in the eyes. I immediately realized everything was already arranged. It was July 1960. I remember it to this day. Terribly cold, but they wouldn't even let me take the shawl my grandmother had made for me. "You don't need anything. There you'll get new clothes," my mother said, as she gathered my few belongings in an old burlap sack. She only let me take a patched-up little dress and a broken comb. My little siblings were still asleep. They didn't let me say goodbye. "Better this way, without crying," Joe Small grumbled, pushing me out of the house. "And don't make a scene in front of Juvenile, understand? You're lucky a man like him is interested in a nobody like you." The journey to town was made in heavy silence, me on the back of Joe Small's rusty bicycle. Each turn of the wheel seemed to be taking me further from my life, as bad as it was. The dust from the road stuck to my tears, forming mud on my face that I didn't even bother to clean off. We arrived in town early. We crossed the church square, passed by Mr. Tony's store, turned at the street where the sheriff's office was located. Nobody thought it strange. Nobody asked anything. A raggedy girl with her drunk stepfather wasn't news to anyone. Juvenile lived in a big corner house, all painted yellow with a high wall and a wrought iron gate. It was the most beautiful house in town, they said. To me, that day, it looked like the entrance to hell. Joe Small knocked on the gate 3 times. Soon, a tall, strong black man appeared who just nodded his head and let us in. We crossed a well-kept garden with roses and even a small fountain. At another time, I might have found it pretty. That day, I could only taste the bile in my mouth. Juvenal was waiting for us on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair smoking a stinking cigar. He was wearing slippers, pajama pants, and an open white shirt showing his hairy belly and a thick gold chain around his neck. Beside him was a small table with a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "So this is the girl?" he asked, looking me up and down like someone examining an animal in a pen. He rose with difficulty because of his enormous belly and came over to me. He took my chin with his fat fingers, turned my face from one side to the other. The smell of cigar and whiskey made me nauseous. "Skinny, but has a good frame. When she puts on a little weight, she'll do just fine." As if I were a plate of food. He took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Joe Small. "It's all there, $500 is agreed." My stepfather opened the envelope immediately, counted the money bill by bill with trembling fingers of greed. $500 was the price of my life. "There's another $300 when she's ready," Juvenal added, looking at me with those small pig eyes. "Come back in a month to pick up the rest." Joe Small stuffed the envelope in the pocket of his worn pants and didn't even look back. He left hurriedly like someone fleeing from a crime. And that's exactly what it was, a crime. They had sold me like you'd sell a goat, a pig, a chicken in the yard. I stood there, legs wobbling, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to run, scream, beg to go back home, but another part knew it wouldn't help. There was nowhere to flee to, no one to help me. And I still had my little siblings, Pinky sick and needing medicine. "Come, girl," Juvenal said, pulling me by the arm forcefully. "I'll show you where you'll stay." He led me through the house, which was even more beautiful inside. Shining wooden floor, heavy dark furniture, pictures on the walls. We went down a long corridor and out through a back door that led to a large yard. At the back of the yard was a smaller building, like a separate house. Juvenal took a key from his pocket, opened the door, and pushed me inside. It was a simple room with a bed, a small wardrobe, and a small table with a basin and water pitcher. The window had iron bars. "For now, you stay here," he said, looking around. "When you're more suitable, I'll take you to the Night Flower." The Night Flower was the brothel that Juvenal owned at the edge of town. Everyone knew, but nobody talked openly about it. It was where married men went after their wives were asleep, where travelers stopped before continuing their journey. "A place of perdition," the preacher said in his Sunday sermon. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice faltering with fear. A silly question because I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear it from his mouth. Juvenal gave a fat laugh that made his belly shake. "Don't play dumb, girl. Didn't your mother explain? You're going to work for me. There are many men who like young girls." I felt my stomach turn, my legs go weak. I leaned against the wall so I wouldn't fall. "But first," he continued, putting his hand on my head like someone petting a dog, "you need to learn a few things, and I'm going to teach you." He left, locking the door from the outside. I heard his footsteps moving away, then the sound of the back door of the house closing. I stood there motionless in the middle of that strange room, crying without making a sound. That day, no one else appeared. I stayed alone until nightfall, when a middle-aged black woman came in carrying a tray of food. It was the first decent meal I had seen in months. Rice, beans, a piece of meat, even a glass of milk. "Eat it all, girl," she said without smiling. "You'll need strength." I wanted to ask who she was, to beg for help, but something in her look told me it wouldn't help. It was the look of someone who had also suffered a lot, who had learned not to meddle where she couldn't. "What's your name?" I asked anyway. "Zepha," she answered curtly. "I'm Juvenal's cook." "Please, Zepha, help me get out of here." "I don't want to stay." She shook her head, interrupting me. "Nobody leaves Juvenal's house without him letting them, girl. Better to accept and do what he says, or it's worse." And she left, locking the door again. In the days that followed, a routine was established. In the morning, Zepha brought coffee and bread. At lunch, plenty of food. In the afternoon, another woman, younger, named Dolly, came to bathe me, brush my hair, put cream on my skin. At night, Zepha brought dinner. It was Dolly who explained everything. She had worked at the Night Flower for years, was one of Juvenal's girls. She had started like me, sold by her own aunt when she was 14. "He's fattening you up, preparing you," she told me during one of the baths, rubbing scented soap on my back. At the Night Flower, men pay more for virgin girls, and Juvenile likes to be the first. Dolly told me there would be an auction. Juvenile did this with all the new girls. He invited rich men from the region, ranchers, politicians, merchants, and auctioned off the first night. The winner paid a fortune. But she also told me that usually Juvenile himself made the highest bid. It's all arranged, she explained. He does this to show power, to humiliate the other men. It's part of the game. For 3 weeks, I lived in that room being fed, cared for, prepared like an animal for slaughter. My body, which before was just skin and bone, began to take shape. My cheeks filled out, my lifeless hair gained shine. I planned to escape, of course, but there was no way out. The window had bars. The door was always locked. The yard was surrounded by a high wall with broken glass on top. And even if I managed to get out, where would I go? I didn't know anyone in town who could help me. On the 23rd day of captivity, I counted each day by scratching a line on the wall behind the bed. Juvenile appeared again. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought a thin man with glasses who carried a black bag. "This is Dr. Raymond," Juvenile announced. "He's going to examine you, see if everything is appropriate." The so-called doctor examined me in a way that made me feel like I wasn't human. He looked at my teeth, my eyes, made me take off my clothes, and turned me from one side to the other, noting things in a little notebook. Juvenile watched the whole time with that disgusting smile on his fat face. "Everything is in order," the doctor said finally, putting his instruments back in his bag. "Healthy and intact." Juvenile smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent. The auction will be the day after tomorrow." When they left, I cried until I had no more tears. It was real. It was going to happen. There was no escape. The next day, Dolly brought a simple but pretty white dress and taught me how to get ready. "Don't resist," she advised me while brushing my hair. "It will only hurt more. Just let it happen. It will end." The auction would be held in a special room at the Night Flower. Juvenile sent Zephyr to get me when it was already dark. I was taken in his car, a gleaming black Cadillac, the only private car in town at that time. The Night Flower was in an old 2-story building at the edge of town. From the outside, it just looked like a large house painted dark red with always closed windows. Inside, it was another world. Crystal chandeliers, mirrors everywhere, red velvet furniture, paintings of nude women on the walls. They took me to a room upstairs where Dolly finished preparing me. She put a little rouge on my cheeks, lipstick on my lips. I felt like a doll being prepared for a macabre exhibition. Downstairs, I could hear music, men laughing, glasses clinking. My heart was beating so hard I thought I would die right there, which would have been a blessing. "It's time," Dolly announced when someone knocked on the door. "Remember what I told you?" I was led downstairs by Zephyr, who held me firmly by the arm. In the main room, about 15 men were seated in armchairs and sofas arranged in a semicircle, all well-dressed. Some I recognized: the store owner, the sheriff, a councilman, ranchers from the region. In the center, standing, Juvenile commanded the spectacle, dressed in a white suit that barely closed over his enormous belly. When I entered, all eyes turned to me. I felt like a piece of meat at the butcher's. "Gentlemen," Juvenile announced, his voice slurred by whiskey. "As promised, I present to you the pearl of the night, freshly arrived from the countryside, pure as spring water, fresh as the morning breeze. Bidding starts at $1,000, and so my auction began. The men gave bids, some laughing, others with looks that made me sick. The price kept rising: $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. Finally, as Dolly had predicted, it was Juvenile himself who made the final bid: $10,000, a fortune at the time. No one dared to outbid him. He smiled triumphantly and announced that the merchandise was sold. The men applauded, drank another glass in celebration, and then began to disperse. Some went upstairs with other women, others left. Juvenile took me by the arm and led me to a room in the back, a special room with a large bed covered with white sheets and red roses scattered about. "Now," he said, closing the door and taking off his jacket, "you're mine." What happened that night, and on many that followed, is not something I want to tell in detail. There are things better left in the shadows of memory, I can only say that I understood why Dolly told me not to resist. When I tried, it only made everything worse. That's how my life in captivity at the Night Flower began. A life I swore wouldn't last long. What Juvenile didn't know was that along with the fear and pain, something else was growing inside me. A hatred so great, so deep, that one day it would overflow in revenge. After that terrible night, a part of me died forever. The innocent girl who arrived at that yellow house no longer existed. In her place remained a broken creature, without hope, who lived one day at a time just to survive. The Night Flower became my prison, a beautiful place on the outside, full of music and laughter, but inside it was a real hell. Me and 9 other girls lived there, each with her horror story, each with her particular way of enduring that life. We slept during the day and worked all night, receiving men of all kinds, ranchers, politicians, merchants, passing travelers. Juvenile kept me as his favorite, his trophy, as he liked to say. I had a room all to myself with a mirror on the wall and a red satin bedspread. The other girls envied me for this, not knowing it was the worst place in the house. It was there that he came almost every night, drunk on whiskey, swollen, with those tiny bloodshot eyes, wanting to show that he was the owner of everything. The house, the business, me. The first months were the worst. I tried to escape twice. The first time, I managed to jump out the back window and run almost to the edge of town. It was a truck driver who betrayed me. He stopped when he saw me crying by the roadside, said he would help me, but took me straight back to Juvenile. He got a free night with the girl of his choice as a reward. The beating I got that night left me in bed for a week. Dr. Raymond had to come give me stitches in my back from how badly Juvenile's belt cut my skin. "Don't mark the face," he would tell Juvenile while he stitched me up. "On the face, it ruins the merchandise." On the second escape attempt, I didn't even make it past the yard. Juvenile's dog, a large, fierce mutt that was let loose at night, caught me by the leg. The screams woke the whole house. This time, Juvenile locked me in the basement for 3 days with no food, just dirty water. When I came out, I had lost so much weight that I looked like a skeleton. After that, I gave up trying to escape. I understood that I would only get out of there when he allowed it or when he was dead. That's when I started paying attention to everything, learning the secrets of the house, the weaknesses of my tormentor. I became the eyes and ears of the Night Flower. Men talked a lot in bed, especially after drinking. They told stories, secrets, gossip. That's how I discovered Juvenile's dirty businesses. He wasn't just a brothel owner. He smuggled merchandise from Mexico, lent money at very high interest rates to desperate people, even had politicians in the state capitol who received money from him in exchange for favors. I also learned about his weaknesses. The main one was drink. Juvenile drank more and more as the years passed. He started early in the morning, and by the time night came, he was already staggering. The whiskey was destroying him from the inside. Swollen liver, yellowed skin, the blood vomit he tried to hide. Time passed. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. I had stopped counting. I had ceased to be a girl and become a woman in that cursed place. Some of the other girls left. Some managed to save money in secret and escape. Others found some man who fell in love and took them away. Some simply couldn't take it and ended up killing themselves. There were also those who got sick and died slowly, wasting away without proper treatment. But new girls arrived too. Every time this happened, I felt a pain in my chest, remembering how I was when I arrived. I tried to help as I could, teaching them tricks to suffer less, to keep a little dignity even in that life. It was in one of these new girls that I found a bit of my history again. She arrived in 1967. I had been there for 7 years, a skinny girl with big, frightened eyes who wouldn't stop crying. When I went to console her one night, I discovered she came from the same township as me. Her name was Josie, and she knew my siblings. "Little Joe works in the fields with his father now," she told me, not knowing the size of the joy she was giving me with those news. "Mary got married last year to a boy from Lawrence, and Pinky is strong, grown up, goes to school in town. My little siblings were alive, growing, going on with their lives." This gave me a strength I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in years, I started thinking about the future, planning my exit from that hell. Juvenile was no longer the imposing man of before. The drink had corroded him inside and out. In his 60s, he looked like an 80-year-old man. His enormous belly was now shriveled, sagging. His red face had turned yellow. His small eyes were sunk in deep, dark circles. He coughed all the time, sometimes with blood. He also didn't seek me out as much. He had other favorites now. Younger girls, fresh meat, as he said in that disgusting way of his. I, at 18, was considered old by the Nightflower standards. This gave me some relief, but also worry. Girls who were no longer useful ended up being sent away or sold to worse brothels in other cities. I began to prepare. Juvenal had a safe in his office behind a painting. Everyone knew that's where he kept money and important documents. What nobody knew was that I knew the combination. I had seen him opening it one night when he was so drunk he could barely stand. I also started storing dry food in the lining of my mattress, crackers, jerky, dried fruits. I stole a little from the kitchen every week, hidden from Zifa, who was now old and almost blind. It was just a matter of waiting for the right moment, and it came on a heavily stormy night in March 1969. The Nightflower was practically empty. Few men risked going out in that rain that flooded the town's streets. Juvenal was in his office drinking alone, as he had done increasingly in recent times. I knocked on the door with a bottle of special whiskey in hand, one of those he saved for important occasions. "Brought a little gift," I said, with my best fake smile. He looked suspicious at first, but the smell of good whiskey was stronger than any suspicion. "Come in," he grumbled, already drunk from what he had taken before. "Close the door." I poured a generous glass and handed it to him. He downed it in one go, feeling the burn go down his throat. I poured another and another. We talked about trivial things, the slow business, the rain that wouldn't stop, town gossip. "You know, Juvenal," I began after the 5th or 6th glass, when I saw he was completely drunk. "I've always wondered how you got so rich. Is it true you have money buried in the yard?" He gave a thick laugh, one of those that made his jowls shake. "Nonsense. Money we keep in the bank, girl." He made a broad gesture with his arm that almost knocked over the bottle. "Or in the safe over there when there's no time to go to the bank." "But what if someone discovered the combination?" I provoked, serving another glass. "Nobody discovers it," he boasted, beating his chest. "There's only one person besides me who knows it, and he's 6 feet under." We continued drinking, him talking more and more slurred, his eyes almost closing with sleep and intoxication. When he finally fell asleep, snoring loudly with his head resting on the desk, I went into action. I opened the safe. The combination was his date of birth, the most obvious thing in the world. Inside were bundle after bundle of money, documents, some cheap jewelry. I took only what I thought was fair for my 7 years of hell. Enough to start a new life far from there, to perhaps find my siblings and help them. I was ready to leave when I looked at that man who had destroyed my life, there drunk and vulnerable. He seemed so small, so pathetic. He was no longer the monster of my nightmares. He was just a sick, weak old man. I thought of all the girls who had passed through there, of those who would still come if he remained alive. I thought of my mother who sold me like an animal. I thought of the years I lost, the childhood I never had, the terror I lived through every night. The decision was almost automatic. I took the bronze letter opener that sat on the desk, heavy, sharp at the point. My hand didn't tremble at all when I raised the object above my head. What happened next is not something I like to remember, much less tell in detail. I can only say that when I left that room, walking calmly under the rain that was still falling heavily, I was a free woman for the first time in many years. No one saw me leave. The rain had made everyone retire early, and the few people who were still awake at the Nightflower were too busy with their own matters to pay attention to me. I caught a bus at the bus station before dawn. I looked out the window as the town was left behind, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, fear, anger, hope. I was free. But I carried with me the scars of that place, some visible on my body, others deeper in my soul. I didn't know yet where I was going or what I would do when I got there. I just knew I had a score to settle with my mother, and that story, my dear, will impress you. The bus continued down the dirt road, jolting at each pothole as if to remind me that life would never be a smooth path after all I had been through. I got off in a small town called Good Hope, which didn't have much good, but gave me a little hope. A small place where nobody knew me and where I could breathe without fear for the first time in 7 years. I rented a small room in a boarding house and started working as a janitor at a school. I saved every penny. I exchanged the money I brought little by little so as not to raise suspicion. In those first months, I lived looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the police or some of Juvenile's thugs appearing to take me back. But the days passed, then the months, and nobody came. Over time, I understood what had happened. Juvenile was powerful, but he lived in a world of shadows. His death wasn't something the authorities would investigate thoroughly. An old brothel owner with enemies everywhere, murdered after a drinking binge. They probably thought it was some settling of scores, some unpaid debt. It was in this small town that I managed to gather courage and go after news of my family. I sent letters to the school where Josie had told me my brother Pinky studied, written under another name, of course, asking about the Silvers family, which was my mother's last name. After several attempts, I received a response from a teacher. The Silvers had moved away from there about 2 years ago. Joe Small had died in a bar fight, stabbed over a gambling debt, and my mother had taken the children to Chicago to a distant cousin's house. That lit a fire in me that I thought had gone out. I needed to find my siblings. They were the only family I had left, the only piece of me that was still worth rescuing from that old life. I saved money for another year. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. During the day, I cleaned houses. In the afternoon, at the school, and at night, I washed dishes in a restaurant. I slept only 4 hours a night, but I didn't care. Each penny brought me closer to my goal. In 1971, with 21 years on my back and a lifetime of suffering, I finally had enough to go to Chicago. The big city was a completely different world from everything I knew. Tall buildings, streets full of hurried people, noise everywhere. I felt small, lost among so many lights and so much movement. But I didn't give up. I began my search going door to door in the Pilsen neighborhood, where the teacher had told me my mother's cousin lived. I didn't have an exact address, just the last name, Carson. I showed the only photo I had, already yellowed and torn at the edges, me as a child with my siblings, taken by a photographer at a church fair before everything collapsed. It was in a corner bakery that I found the first concrete clue. The owner, an Italian woman with white hair and thick hands from a lifetime of work, recognized my mother in the photo. "She used to come buy bread here," said the woman, adjusting her thick glasses. "But it's been a few months since she appeared. I heard they moved after the factory where her son worked closed." My heart raced. I was so close. I asked about which son, what he was like. The youngest, a skinny boy. "Pinky, I think they called him that because of an extra toe he has on his foot. Family thing, they say." It was him, my little brother, not so little anymore, of course. He must have been about 15 by then. The idea of being so close to him gave me an energy I hadn't felt in years. After a few more days of tireless searching, a neighbor from the building where they had lived gave me the new address. It was in the far east side, in a working-class neighborhood called East Side, almost a separate city at the time, full of empty lots and simple houses built by the residents themselves. I took the crowded train there, feeling my heart almost coming out of my mouth. What would I say? How would I explain my years of absence? Would my siblings still remember me? The house was small, made of exposed brick without plaster, like so many others on the dirt street. An improvised clothesline with bamboo supported some faded clothes. I stood in front for almost an hour, gathering courage, rehearsing words that fled from my mind with each attempt. When I finally knocked on the door, it was answered by a young woman of about 18, pretty, with a baby in her arms. I recognized her eyes immediately, the same as my mother's, the same as mine. "Mary?" I asked, my voice breaking. She looked at me, confused, slowly shaking her head. "Yes." "Who are you?" I couldn't respond immediately. Tears were already streaming down my face. How could I explain? How could I tell her I was the sister she probably didn't even remember anymore? "I'm Tiana," I finally managed to say. "Your sister." Her face transformed instantly. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened in silent astonishment. The baby began to cry, startled by the sudden tension. "That can't be," she murmured, taking a step back. "My sister died. Mama said you died." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Dead! My mother had told my siblings I was dead. At that moment, a young man appeared behind her, tall, thin, with the same dark hair as our family. Pinky, my little brother whom I carried in my arms, whom I rocked when he cried from hunger, whom I secretly gave my portion of food. "What's wrong, Mary? Who is this woman?" he asked suspiciously. Before she could answer, I heard another voice coming from inside the house, a voice that froze my blood in my veins. The voice of my mother. "Who's there, girl? If it's the payment man, tell him there's nobody home." She appeared at the door, drying her hands on a dish towel. Older, of course, with all white hair and a more wrinkled face, but it was still her. She still had that hard look, that thin mouth always contracted in a grimace of discontent. Time seemed to stop when our eyes met. I saw recognition arrive slowly, followed by something I had never seen in her before. Fear. "It can't be," she murmured, just as Mary had done. "You're dead?" "No, I'm not, Mother," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'm very much alive, and I've come for the truth." What happened next was a confusion of screams, crying, and revelations. Mary crying, the baby wailing, Pinky confused, my mother alternating between denying everything and trying to expel me. It was there in that small house on the outskirts that I finally confronted the demon of my childhood. Not Juvenal, he had already paid for what he did, but the woman who brought me into the world and then sold me as if I were an animal. "Why?" I asked, after things had calmed down a bit and we were all sitting in the tiny living room. "Why did you sell me to Juvenal? And why did you lie to my siblings saying I was dead?" My mother didn't respond immediately. She looked at the floor, the ceiling, the peeling walls, anywhere but my eyes. "It was you or all of us," she finally said, her voice low. "Pinky was going to die if we couldn't get medicine. Mary had been running a high fever for days. There was no food, no money, nowhere to turn. And you were disposable, not the daughter that nobody wanted, who only reminded me of the man who abandoned you." She didn't deny it or try to. She just sat there, aged and small in the plastic chair, as if all the weight of the years and choices had finally fallen on her. "Why did you tell them I was dead?" I insisted. "It was easier," she answered after a long silence. "Easier than saying I sold you. Easier than explaining why you never came back, why you never looked for us." The anger I felt at that moment was different from anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't the blind hatred I had felt for Juvenal. It wasn't the desperation of my years in captivity. It was something colder, more calculated. The anger of someone who understands for the first time that some things are unforgivable. I looked at my siblings, Mary with her baby, now calmer in her arms, Pinky still standing as if ready to flee if necessary. They weren't to blame. They were victims just as much as I was, just of a different kind of abandonment. "Do you know what Juvenal did to me?" I asked my mother, my voice almost a whisper. "Do you know where I ended up? What I had to endure for 7 years?" She didn't answer, but I saw in her eyes that she knew. Maybe not all the details, but enough to understand the horror she had condemned me to live. "He's dead now," I continued, seeing the shock on her face. "He died 2 years ago. I won't say how, but I can tell you he'll never do to another girl what he did to me." My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with terror. Pinky took a step back. Mary clutched her baby to her chest. I realized then that I had become the monster in their eyes. The lost sister who returned from the dead, not as a victim, but as an avenger. That wasn't what I wanted. I hadn't come there to spread more fear and suffering. "I didn't come to hurt anyone," I said, softening my voice. "I just wanted to know the truth. Just wanted to see my siblings again." We stayed together the rest of the day, a strange, tense reunion, full of uncomfortable silences and questions that no one knew how to ask. Mary introduced her husband when he arrived from work. Let me hold her baby, my nephew. Pinky gradually came closer, telling about school, the job he had lost, dreams of being a mechanic. About little Joe, the middle brother, I learned he had moved to the countryside, married a local girl. "He comes to visit at Christmas," Mary said. He'll be so surprised to see you." When night fell, it was time to go. I had rented a room in a boarding house nearby and needed to think about what I would do from then on. At the door, my mother held my arm, her touch hesitant, almost afraid. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her for a long moment. The woman who gave me life and then took it away with the same ease. The woman who sold me to save her other children. The woman who perhaps, in her own distorted way, thought she had done what needed to be done. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I need to think." In truth, I already knew the answer. I had found my siblings. I had discovered the truth. But forgiveness, that was another story, one I didn't know if I could ever write. I left that house carrying more questions than answers. The revenge against Juvenal had freed me from one prison. But I realized there were other invisible bars I still needed to break inside myself. What I did afterward, the choices I made, the paths I followed to try to rebuild a life from zero, that's a story for another day. A story of how I survived not just the hell of the night flower, but the hell I carried within me after everything I lived through. I left my mother's house that night with a storm inside my chest. I walked aimlessly through the dirt streets of East Side, trying to organize the feelings that were mixing inside me. Anger, relief, sadness, a hint of joy for having seen my siblings. It was as if all the emotions I had repressed for years were now overflowing all at once. I returned to the boarding house and spent the night wide awake. The next day, still not knowing exactly what to do, I decided I couldn't leave like this. I had too many unanswered questions, open wounds that needed to heal, or at least stop bleeding so much. I bought bread and milk at a corner store and returned to my mother's house. Mary opened the door, surprised to see me there so early. Her baby, my nephew Joaquin, was in her arms, looking at me with those curious little eyes that children have. "I thought you weren't coming back," she said, letting me in. "I thought so too," I replied honestly. My mother was in the small kitchen, making coffee on an improvised wood stove in the yard. When she saw me, her aged face showed a mixture of emotions I couldn't decipher. Fear, shame, perhaps even a little hope. "I want to talk," I said, without beating around the bush. Just the two of us. We sat on a wooden bench at the back of the yard, away from the others' ears. The day was dawning, the sun still weak, trying to pierce the morning mist. I stayed silent for a while, looking for the right words. "I need to know everything," I finally began. "The whole truth. Why did you hate me so much since I was little? I always felt I was different from the others, that you looked at me differently." My mother sighed deeply, running her hand through her gray hair. "I never hated you, girl," she said softly. "I just didn't know how to love you right." And then, there in that modest yard, with the sound of the big city beginning to wake up around us, my mother finally told me a story I had never heard. Her story. She had gotten pregnant with me at 16 by a man who promised the world but disappeared as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. Her family, very religious, threw her out of the house. She survived by washing clothes, living in a small room given out of charity. When I was born, she almost died in childbirth, alone, with no one to help. "I looked at you and saw the end of my dreams," she confessed, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Saw everything I had lost, everything I would never have again. It's wrong, I know. A child isn't to blame, but I couldn't help it. It was years of struggle, of hunger, of heavy work. When she met Joe Small, she thought she had finally found a better path. He promised to take care of both of us, provide a roof, food on the table. At first he even tried, but the drink always won. When the other children were born, there was nothing left to give. Not food, not love, not hope," she continued. "I was empty inside." Her story didn't justify what she did to me. Nothing would justify it. But for the first time, I was able to see beyond the monstrous figure I had built in my mind. I saw a woman broken by life who made terrible choices driven by desperation and her own pain. "When Juvenal came with that proposal," she said, her voice almost disappearing, "part of me knew it was wrong, but another part thought maybe it would be better for you too, that you would have food, clothes, a better life than I could give." I laughed without any humor. "Better? Do you know what happened to me there, Mother? Do you know what that man did? What he allowed other men to do?" She closed her eyes as if wanting to block the images my words evoked. At first, Joe would go there sometimes to get more money, she confessed. He said you were fine, that you were working as a maid in the house, learning to read and write properly. I believed it because I wanted to believe. Then he stopped going. He said Juvenile didn't want any more contact, that it was better that way. And when he died, why didn't I go look for you? Shame, she answered simply, and fear of what you would say if you found me, of what you would do. It was easier to tell the children you had died. That way, they stopped asking, stopped wanting to look for you. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The sun was already higher, warming our backs. I can't forgive you, I said finally. Not now, perhaps never, but I also can't carry this hatred anymore. It's destroying me from the inside, just like it destroyed you. She nodded, understanding. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to justify herself anymore. I think she knew that some things go beyond any possibility of redemption. I spent the rest of that day with my siblings. Mary showed photos of her simple wedding, told me how she met her husband right in the neighborhood. Pinky talked about plans to go back to school at night, to get a better job. They were good people who had survived in their own way the disaster that was our childhood. Before leaving, I left my address in Good Hope and a little of the money I had brought with me for Joaquin. I told Mary and Pinky to study, said I would keep in touch, that I would visit when I could. It was a vague promise, and I think we all knew that. Some wounds need a lot of time to heal, if they ever heal completely. I returned to Good Hope that same week. The small town that before had seemed just a temporary refuge now presented itself as a possibility for a new beginning. I had enough savings to open a small business. I decided to set up a boarding house for young women who came to work at the textile factory that had just opened in town. The girls' house, as I called it, became my life project, a safe, clean, decent place where working girls could live without fear. I charged a fair price, provided breakfast, and most importantly, guaranteed that no man, no matter how important, would set foot in there after dark. The years passed. The boarding house prospered, though it never made me rich. I grew old alone, but surrounded by my girls, as I called the young women who passed through the boarding house. Some stayed a short time, others for years. Many left to get married, others to seek work in bigger cities. I always advised them, shared what life had taught me in the hardest way. I kept in touch with my siblings through letters. Mary sent me photos of Joaquin growing up, then of the other children she had. Pinky managed to graduate as a mechanic technician, opened a small garage in Chicago. Little Joe, whom I met again some years later, became a pastor of an evangelical church in the countryside. They all built decent lives despite the difficult beginning. My mother died in 1983 of a cancer that consumed her from the inside, just as remorse had done for so many years. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent flowers and a letter that was never read. Some reconciliations are only possible in thought, never in reality. Life followed its course. I saw changes come. Better electric light, the streets being paved, color television, the times changing. I watched from afar the transformations of the country, always with the look of someone who had seen enough not to be easily impressed by promises of better times. In 1991, I received an unexpected visit. A woman in her 40s, well-dressed, with a distinct way of speaking and carrying herself. It took me a while to recognize her. It was Josie, that girl who had arrived at the Night Flower when I was still there, who had given me news of my siblings. "How did you find me?" I asked, serving coffee in the small living room of the boarding house. "It wasn't easy," she smiled, "but I never forgot you, Tiana. You helped me in those horrible days, taught me how to survive." She had managed to escape a few months after my departure, a carefully planned escape, unlike my desperate attempts. She had found shelter with a nun who helped girls like us. She studied, became a teacher, had a family, children, a life that seemed so normal it almost hurt. "I came to tell you something," she said after a while. "They found his body." She didn't need to explain who she was talking about. There was only one he that mattered in this story. After he died," she continued, carefully choosing her words, "the Night Flower was closed. The girls were dispersed. Some returned home, others ended up in worse places. The mansion was abandoned for years. Now they were demolishing the place to build a supermarket. During the excavations, they found human bones buried in the basement. Not just his, but those of other people. Missing girls, perhaps, rivals in business, lives he had erased during his years of reign in that small town. The police are investigating, Josie explained. They're looking for people who worked there, who knew him. I thought you should know. I thanked her for the warning, but assured her they had no way of linking me to any of that. I had disappeared without a trace, had changed my name, had built a new life from scratch. Besides, it had been more than 20 years. It was a cold case, as they say. Josie left the next day, leaving behind more than a warning. She left a mirror where I could see what my life might have been if my mother's choices had been different. I didn't feel envy, just a gentle sadness for what I never had a chance to be. I never heard news of the case again. I imagine it was filed away like so many other mysteries in small inland towns. The evil that Juvenal did remained buried with his bones, and the secrets of that basement were covered by a ceramic floor where housewives today push shopping carts without having any idea of what lies beneath their feet. The years passed. I aged gradually. I saw the world changing more and more rapidly around me. The boarding house continued to function until 2005, when my legs could no longer stand going up and down stairs all day. I sold the place to one of my last girls, who kept the spirit of the business. Today, at 79, I live in a simple house on the outskirts of 3 Rivers. I have a small pension, occasional visits from my great-nephews, and memories, the good and the bad, to keep me company. This story I've told here had never left my lips before. It's too heavy a burden to share in plaza conversations or coffee circles, but I thought it was time to let it out. To let this damned river finally flow. If there's a lesson in all this, perhaps it's that life goes on even when we think it's over. That surviving is sometimes the greatest revenge we can have against those who tried to destroy us. And that forgiving is not forgetting or justifying. It's simply choosing not to let hatred continue to eat you from the inside after it has already done too much damage. Oh, my dear, if you've made it this far in this heavy story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy to hear certain truths. I know that well. If you can, give this channel a boost, will you? Just click on the like button and subscribe. This old lady here is very happy to know there are people who want to hear what I have to tell. And look, if you want to hear more stories like this one, the Grandparents' Tales channel has new videos every week. Real stories from other grandparents who, like me, carry a chest of memories that needs to be opened from time to time. Life is made of stories, my dears. Some beautiful, others painfully ugly, but all of them deserve to be told, if only to prevent them from repeating. Because the past, when hidden in the shadows, has a habit of coming back to haunt us.